Today, we explore enigmatic scrolls of Esther, where absence of the text eclipses the written word. We'll learn that this peculiar phenomenon is just a fragment of a much larger tendency reflected in the Geniza to deliberately produce incomplete texts. We shall unravel the motivations behind this practice, which will serve to remind us of the formidable challenges involved in reproducing sacred text by a scribal hand. This is an image-based presentation. Visit the show's notes to see the relevant images. You're looking now at an image of the Ben Ezra Shul in Cairo, in Egypt. Today, no one davens there anymore. There are very few Jews that still live in Egypt, but once upon a time there was a very sizable Jewish community there, and this was one of the shuls. This institution is a very old institution. It's been there for many, many centuries. And this particular building was renovated sometime around the 1890s. But in this location there has been a shul by this name, Ben Ezra Shul, for a very long time. And this is the place where the famous Cairo Geniza was held. So what does that mean? If you walk into the shul over here, and this is the north-facing wall that faces Yerushalayim, where you would daven, and there's the Aron Kodesh. So on the higher level, there's the women's section on the right and on the left. So if we were to go up to the left-hand side of the balcony and walk all the way to the northern wall and look high up toward the top, there would be a gap in the wall, and this was a chamber where what we call today shemus would be stored. Now, this was very common for shemus to be stored, to be brought to a shul, but what's unique about here is that it was never emptied. Usually, when it comes Pesach time, the shamash of the shul would go and take the shemus out and bury it in the ground, and then it disappeared forever. For reasons that no one really knows, the documents, papers, books, manuscripts, and fragments remained here, century after century after century. Materials dating back all the way to the 9th and 10th century. It's a very long time, 1,000 years. Here's an image in the Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv. They created a diorama of what this would have looked like. And here's this individual climbing up on a ladder and taking some materials and putting it into that room. Subsequently, other rooms in this building also became storehouses, and then it just became a thing. Shemus went in, and it never went out. It never went out to the cemetery to get buried. And due to the climate that is very dry, things were preserved. And then comes the late 1880s, 1890s, and this is when Europeans are going, generally speaking, to the Middle East and finding riches that they bring back to Paris, to London, and to all these places that you can see today in the British Museum, the Louvre, etc. So that kind of had an influence on Jews at the time, who said, we can do this in a Jewish way. And European Jews go to Cairo, and they basically start taking these documents, these pieces of paper, these fragments, these old Sfarim, and they bring them back to Europe. And nothing is really left in Egypt. And today, this archive is scattered in many dozens of different institutions around the world. The biggest collection is in the Cambridge University in England. So this is a little bit of a background about the Cairo Geniza, enough for us to say what we need to say today. And now let's move to talk about one of the items found in the Cairo Geniza, which we are going to call now the Curious Megillah. So let us put up on the screen the Curious Megillah. It's a fragment, but clearly from Megillah Esther. Whenever we see something like this, we always want to know how to date it. Is it 10th century, 11th century, 12th century? Until the experts actually weigh in and do this analysis, so then we don't know. But it's somewhere over there, and for the purposes of our class, it doesn't matter whether this is a 10th century, 11th century, 12th. It's not really going to make a difference, but it's quite old. So it's a Megillah Esther, as we can clearly see, and I'm going to try to read the Megillah off this copy that we have here. So I'm going to read it. Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh u'Achashverosh HaMelech mehodu ve'ad kosheva ve'esrim u'maya medina. I did that rather successfully. I successfully read the first pasuk of the Megillah. There was no challenge from that. That's really nice. This was written 800 years ago, 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago. I'm able to read this text that was written, that was copied so long ago. Okay, so if I did well there, let me proceed to the next pasuk and try to read the second pasuk in the Megillah. Bayamim hahenke. And then I realize there's a problem. The problem is that I don't have the rest of the second pasuk. All right, the third pasuk. Bishna shalosh l'malchai. Those words are there, but that's it. I don't have the rest of the pasuk. Es eisher, and then it ends. And then the next pasuk begins. Uvim leis hayomim ho'elem. Then there's a colon, and it's over. And then I get the next pasuk. Chor karpasus cheles ve'ashkois b'klei zahav. All right, you get the pattern. Here's the idea. Here I present it on a Chumash of today, what it looks like. The first pasuk is presented in full, and then subsequent to that, pasuk Beis, pasuk Gimel, pasuk Dalid, pasuk Hey, pasuk Vav, and pasuk Zayin, which is all we see in this shot, either has 2 words presented of each pasuk, or 3 words presented of each pasuk. And right away the question is, what is this? Why is it written in this way? Now right off the bat, we recognize that this type of Megillah is going to not really be kosher for reading in shul. Why is that? So let's learn a shtickle Gemara, Meseches Megillah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. And the Gemara says as follows. Tanu Rabbanan, we have in a brisa that says as follows. Hishmit bas soifer, oisei psukim. If the scribe omitted words or psukim, letters or psukim, V'kra'an ha'koira, but the Baal Koira read it k'meturgaman ha'metargem, in the way that a meturgaman reads the Targum, which Rashi tells us means that the meturgaman would generally read the Targum by heart, al peh, because he didn't have the text of the Torah there. So whether he had Targum notes on the side, whatever, for our purposes, he was being metargem al peh. He wasn't reading it out of the text. So basically, the case here is if the Sofer omitted passages from the Megillah and the reader reads it Baal Peh. So the din is Yatza, you're Yatza. It's okay to hear the Megillah Baal Peh, it sounds like. However, the Gemara questions this and says, Meisvei, we're going to ask a question. If you had worn out letters, or the letters are torn, if you could still see leftovers, the remains of these letters, then it's fine. V'im lav, if you cannot see the remains of these letters, then psula, then it's not kosher. So here we see that you need to have all the words there on the Megillah. Ad kadei kach, that if it was once there and they started fading away and you can't tell anymore, then it's not kosher. So how does this work together with the din that we saw before, that it's okay to read it Baal Peh? Answers the Gemara, lo kasha, there's not a question over here. Ha bechula, ha b'miksasa. When do we say it's a problem? When you don't have the letters there, when you don't have psukim there, if it's bechula, if it's missing entirely. Ha b'miksasa, but if there's only a little missing, when we said that it's okay, if the Sofer missed some and the guy read it Baal Peh, it's okay. When is that talking about? B'miksasa, where it's only miksas, up to 49% of the Megillah is missing, then it's fine. But if it's going to be bechula, but really not only bechula, if it's going to be ruba, which ruba is kechula, that's also that is not going to be kosher. That's not going to be okay. And so if you go back to this, and you don't need to be a mathematician to realize that if you're going to have, let's say, the first pasuk here and there, the first pasuk of every new parsha, and I don't mean the prakim, but each parsha in the Megillah, if you had it in full, and subsequent to that you only had 2 or 3 words, you don't need to be a mathematician to realize that you're not going to have the majority of words here. And so by definition, if were this to be read as a Megillah, it would be pasul, which only makes the existence of such a document even more curious. There's another reason why this Megillah would be pasul, and this is information that I hid from you until now, and that is, it says in Rambam as follows. Hilchos Megillah Perek Beis. Ein koisen a Megillah ela b'dyoy ala gvil oy ala klaf kesefer Torah. When we write the Megillah, it needs to be with ink on gvil or klaf. This is parchment, whether it's the thicker parchment, the full animal skin, or klaf, which is only half of the animal skin. But that's how it needs to be written, kesefer Torah. Hoisak suva alan yor, if it's written on paper, says the Rambam in Halacha Tes, psula, it is pasul. So if you look at Cambridge University's the data that they have of this particular piece of Megillah Esther, the material is paper. It is not on parchment. They're always careful to indicate if it's parchment or if it's paper. And so now we have two reasons why this particular Megillah would not be kosher for reading, which only now makes it more curious. What is the purpose of this very gap-filled text of Megillah Esther? Now, if this were just one example, it would still be a reason to ask these questions. But what's interesting is it's not the only example. Here's another document that is pretty much the exact same thing. The first pasuk of the Megillah is written out in full, but after that, it's Bishnas Shalosh. And then it says, Baharoi Soyas Oishar. And then it says, Uvim Lois Hayamim Ha'ela. And then it says, Chor Karpasus Chelas. A very similar pattern to what we saw before. This is obviously a different piece, also written on paper, by the way, not on parchment. And this one, what's unique about this is the fact that it has nikud. Now, I want you to know, the fact that it has nikud, that in and of itself does not make it puzzle. The Shulchan Aruch addresses this in Erech Chaim Simin Tov Reish Sadik Aleph. The Mechaber Rabbi Yosef Karo writes, Megilah shehi nekuda, a Megillah that has nikud, eina nifselas bekach. It does not become disqualified. The implication is it's not ideal. That's not the right way. It doesn't say ksheira. It doesn't say lechatchila. You can do it this way. Eina nifselas bekach. It does not become disqualified. So on the right hand side, the Bar HaGoyla, his name was Reb Moshe Rivkis, and he was a Rav in Vilna in the 1600s. So he says that the source of this din is the Rashba and the Tshuva. The Rashba Taka has a Tshuva where he says that Nikud is okay in the Megillah. But he brings, and the Reb Moshe Rivkis writes, L'chatchila ein l'kois v'kach. It's better not to do it this way. The Ladas HaMardcha hi psula, because other Rishonim think that it's possible. Okay? But the bottom line is, the result is that it would not be possible. So when we look back at this Megillah here, the Nikud over here does not render it puzzle. However, the fact that it is very, very incomplete does, and the fact that it's written on paper does, just like the other one that I showed you a moment ago. And now we come to the third, and this will be the final piece, also from Megillah Esther, and this is pretty much the same idea. On the right-hand side over here, this is actually the ending of the Megillah. In fact, you could see over here where there's a colophon. It says, Nishlam Sefer Megillas Esther. The Megillas Esther has been completed. So that's the scribe being excited about the fact that he just finished his work. So this is the last few psukim of the Megillas Esther on the right-hand side. You'll see over here, Kimu v'kiblo ha'Yehudim. And that's all you get from that pasuk. And on the next line, you get a different pasuk. And then on the following line, Vatichtov Esther HaMalka. Right? And that's it. And then the next line, Vayishlach Svarim. And basically here it's set up in a way that it's actually more visually appealing. It's set up as bricks, almost like one pasuk leaning a little more to the right, one pasuk leaning more a little to the left. Every line gets its own pasuk, but the bottom line is the full pasuk is not here. So whereas the right-hand page is the ending of the Megillah, this is actually from Perek Dalet and Perek Hey, where you have the same thing. As we can see over here, the pasuk called Avdei HaMelech, okay? That may be the longest pasuk in the Megillah. Kol Avdei HaMelech v'ya. It's a very hard pasuk. And the reason it's very long, well, for this particular Megillah owner, he gets 3 words. That's all he gets. Kol Avdei HaMelech. The next line says, Vayegidu l'Mardechai es divrei Esther. That's all we have over here. These are not the only 3 examples. This is enough to establish a pattern. We have a pattern of these very curious Megillahs that were written sometime during the Middle Ages, sometime in the Middle East, in the area of Eretz Yisrael or Mitzrayim, and they raise all types of questions about what their function was. Let's continue, and now we're going to transition. In order to understand this about the Megillah, let's have a look at a similar phenomenon when it comes to the Torah. You're looking here at a fragment that, when we're looking at it right now, just looks like actually mostly it looks like a listing of a whole bunch of random letters. But if you're looking closer, you'll actually see there's some words you can make out. You maybe see an Avram, you may see a Kayin, you may see a Lemech, but mostly it just looks like 1 or 2 letters just hanging all over this page. So I'm going to blow it up so we can have an easier time taking a look at it. Let's look at the bottom 2 lines over here. It's clearly a Chumash, and it's the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha. And we read here, it says, Vayomer Hashem el Avram lech lecha. That's great. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words at the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha, and we could read it, and we're happy. But then all things go downhill after here. You get a langachaf with a kamatz, a langachaf with a kamatz, a mem, a blur, the word el, aleph, shin, aleph. Okay, then we go ve'escha. We know what that is. The beginning of the next pasuk is ve'escha legoy gadol. And we have what looks like the beginning of legoy and gadol, and then we get a langachaf, and then a lamid, and a mem, and a yud. And then the next pasuk begins va'avarcha. This is very bizarre. It's even hard to understand what we're looking at first glance. One second. Let's go and look a different manuscript. This is from Parshas Tetzaveh, and we're going to see something very, very similar. So I'm going to make it bigger so we can look at it. The pasuk in Parshas Tetzaveh begins va'achal Aaron, and then after that we just get vav veiz nun, an aleph, a shin, an aleph, a vav aleph, a whole bunch of gibberish till you get to the end of the pasuk. Then we get va'achlu oisam, and then if you read this, it would say shepachalei desachor loy mav. Okay, you get the point. This is quite problematic. So what is happening over here? Okay, so what's happening over here is as follows. I'm presenting here a picture of a regular Chumash, highlighting what this scribe did in his Chumash here. Vayomer Hashem al Avram lech lecha is written out in full, as you can see over here. But then what happens is, he gives us just the langachaf of the word me'artzecha, and just the langachaf of the word umimoladetcha, and what appears to be the mem from the word umi base avicha. Then there's a blur there, so we can't see. And then he gives us the word el, and then from the word ha'aretz, he gives us the aleph. From the word asher, he gives us the aleph and the shin. Ar eka, he gives us the second aleph, the ar eka, the aleph with a segel. And that here, v'escha legoy gadol v'avar rechicha, we're getting here the langachaf from the word v'avar rechicha. V'agad lo shmecha, we're getting the lamid. Shmecha, we're getting the mem. V'heye, we're getting the yud. Bracha, we're getting the chaf. Now, what is the common denominator? Clearly, we're getting one, in some cases 2 letters from each word in the pasuk. But what there doesn't seem at first glance to be, it's not the first letter, it's not always the last letter, it's not always the second letter, it's not always the second to last letter. What letter is the scribe choosing to give us for each word over here? So there is a pattern. Almost always, with one exception, the pattern is where we put the trup. So the word me'artzecha, where do we put the mercha? We put it under the langachaf. Why do we put the mercha under the langachaf? Because the proper way to read it is me'artzecha. So because the proper way to stress it is under the langachaf, so that is what the scribe gave us. And likewise, for each word, the one letter for that representing that word is the letter that has the stress, is the letter that gets the trup, and in fact, he gives us the trup. It's not so easy to read, but in each case, he gives us the trup as well. And that's what's happening here. If you go to Parshas Tetzaveh, we'll take a second look at the image, we'll notice the same thing happens over here. Where, for the words as psar ha'ayov, achal aharon uvanav, es, so the stress is obviously the aleph, so that's all he gives you. Bisar, this is on the sin, so he gives us the sin. Ha'ayil, on the aleph, etc., etc., etc. We're not trying to figure out why right now. We're just trying to figure out what. We figured out what it seems this scribe is doing over here in these 2 separate manuscripts of the Torah. Now there's another thing that's happening here. If you go back to this page over in both of these manuscripts, we'll notice that there's also small writing at the bottom and along the sides, and likewise over here, small writing over here on the bottom a little. What is, and likewise in the next manuscript from Parshas Tetzaveh also we have small words that are not part of the biblical narrative. So what is this? What are we looking at? So here, let's take a focus. We're going to look at 3 words. Here is the words Asher Ar Eka, right? So he gave us the Segel Aleph for the word Ar Eka. On top of it, there is a little base. Ar Eka, base. Okay, on the top of the word va'agadla was represented by a lamed, because lamed is distress. Right on top of this distressed word where you get the trup, right on top of the word va'agadla, we get another lamed. So our echo got a beis, va'agadla got a little lamed, and then for the yud representing the word veheye, we got a dalid. This is known as the Mesoira. What's the Mesoira? So the Mesoira basically is, let's go to our Eka Beis. There are 2 times in all of Tanakh, from the beginning to the end, where you're going to have our Eka spelled exactly this way with this nikud. Because remember, you could have Eka with a segal in the beginning, but this is not Eka. This is our Eka. You could have it with a lange chaf instead of a lange kaf. Right? You could have, so this word could be done in various different ways. When do you have these 4 letters, Aleph, Resh, Aleph, Lange, Kaf, with this exact nikud 2 times in Tanakh? That is indicated by this base. Va'agadla, no, it's not 30 times. The lamed does not stand for 30. What is the lamed doing in this chumash? Lamed means lace, and that means there is no match. In the entire Tanakh, you will not find the word va'agadla spelled exactly this way, with these exact letters, and this exact nikud. You will not find it, and that's the sign, the convention that was used then to tell us that is the lamed lace. There is no match for that. Veheye, dalid. There are 4 times where we have the word veheye, but remember, this could be vahaya easily, right? It's the same letters. No, but it's veheye, not vahaya. So that unique nikud to this word, and this spelling of this word together with the nikud, we have 4 times. The truth is that in this one is actually not accurate. We actually have it 6 times, but that's another story, and we don't need to resolve that here today. This is known as the Mesoira. What is the purpose of this Mesoira? The purpose of this Mesoira is as follows. Imagine you're a scribe, and your job is to copy a chumash. I'm not worried about a Sefer Torah right now. Your job is to copy a chumash. You want to give an accurate chumash. Okay, so you get a chumash and you copy. How do you know that the copy that you're using is a good copy and reliable? Maybe there's a mistake. When it comes to Parsha Zocher and it comes to Zecher, how are you going to know if it's Zecher or if it's Zecher? What's the right way? Or it says Veheye Bracha. Maybe it should say Vahaya Bracha. So you can say, yeah, but the copy that you have says Veheye Bracha, and you should rely on that. But maybe that's a mistake. It's inevitable that you're going to have mistakes. How do you know that it's taka supposed to be Veheye Bracha? So what was developed, and Chazal spoke about the concept of Mesoira. They use this word Mesoiras in numerous times. And this became a whole institution. There were experts in this area over the centuries of Jewish history, where the idea was, it's not enough, if you want to produce your chumash, it's not enough just to get it right. Also give the code. What does that mean? Tell us, next to the word areka, put the beis there. And now I know that there's only supposed to be 2 arekas. So now I know that this is an easy way to spot check. Areka or ereka? Oh, they're very simple. It says a beis here. There's only supposed to be 2. So let me spot check mine. Oh, if I have 3, then it means there's a problem. So this is an extra layer of control to ensure that the biblical text is being transmitted properly, which is what is called Mesoira. And that's why it's good to know. Va'agadla is only once. It's only once. So if you find the second time, then you know something was done wrong. And this is a way of controlling the accuracy of the biblical text. In old Chumash manuscripts, the Mesoira was on every page. Today, when you open the average Chumash, you don't see these notes there anymore. But in the old Kisvei Yad, this is the Sassoon Codex, which went up for auction, if you remember, in May of last year for $38 million. It's from the 10th century. We had a chance to speak about it last year before Parsha Zachar. It gives you the text of the Torah with Nikud and with Trup in 3 columns that we're looking at right now. But then on the bottom and on the top, along with, in between the margins, it's giving you this code that is supposed to help us transmit the text faithfully. And most of the Kisvei Yad, not all, but most of the Kisvei Yad that we still have, that we're able to see from the Middle Ages, preserved this Mesoira. This code was presented. And when Chumashim were first printed, they gave it to us. This is the famous printing of the Torah from 1524 in Venice. Sometimes it's called the Mikrois Gedolos. Even though I don't think it was called that name at the time. Rashi and Even Ezra, the text of the Torah, the text of the Targum. But on the side over here, all of this on the side, and these little notes down the middle between the Chumash and the Targum are these notes for the Mesoira. That and more information in the Mesorah is given in these longer notes that are there at the bottom. So again, and then at a certain point, people came along and said, what do we need this for? We don't use it. It's gibberish. We don't understand it. It's actually not the easiest thing to read. It was written very much in shorthand. And so slowly it disappeared from our Tanakhs. And this actually is the background to many of the comments of the Baal HaTurim. You'll notice Baal HaTurim, half the time he's doing gematria. What's he doing the other half of the time? The other thing he's doing, the comment begins, it says, Beis b'Mesorah. And what he means by Beis b'Mesorah is, because remember, all the Spanish Jews looking at Chumashim in the 1300s, they were seeing this all the time. So it was inevitable that they would say, well, there's a Beis, which means the word our Eka appears 2 times. So there must be obviously a connection between this time and that time. So what is the connection? And so the Baal HaTurim offered the connection, but because the two are connected in this way or in the following way. So let's look at the Mesorah that we have here for the word Vehayeh. Remember, over the Yud, we have a Dalet over there, which told us that the word Vehayeh appears 4 times, and here is the longer note that actually spells out what those 4 times are. Vehayeh, it says Dalet, and then it says, so that means 4 times, Bracha, which is this one, okay, we're counting this one, and then it says Tamim, Nachain, and Lila'av. So that's the additional 3 times. So here are the additional 3 times. Bereshis Yud Zayin, Hatzhalech Lefanai Vehayeh Samim, Shmoitz Lamed Daled Vehayeh Nachain Laboiker, and Shoiftim Yud Zayin Vehayeh Lila'av. It's not such a, think about it, it's not such a common word. V'haya is hundreds of times. V'hayeh, not so common. And so he tells us it's these 4 times. I mentioned before, there's another 2 v'hayehs. One is part of Shoiftim Yud Zayin, so it could be that it doesn't count as a separate one. That I'm not sure. There is another one that he missed over here, but we don't have to deal with that right now. Now what does the Baal HaTurim do over here? The Baal HaTurim gives you a vart. What's the vart he says? He says, he has it vav b'Mesorah. So he says vav b'Mesorah, and he says that if you do v'heyei samim, like Bereshis Yud Zayin, if you're erlich yid, and if you're v'heyei nachain, and you're a richtig yid, so then what's going to happen? Then you're going to have v'heyei bracha. Then you're going to have a bracha in your life. And v'heyei lila'av, you're going to be considered, Av means a prestigious position. So this is how the Baal HaTurim, looking at the Mesorah notes that is in front of him, this is how he's explaining what this is. Okay, so we have a shtickle understanding of what we're looking at, but we still didn't discuss why in the world would someone, whether it's the 10th century or the 12th century, produce a Chumash that is of this sort. What is the function of this? So it would seem that the idea is there is someone who says, I only need to know the key, these 2 things. I need to know the trop, I need to know where to put the trop, and I need to know the Mesorah notes. That's all I need. So give me a manual that's going to help me do that job. Now what is it? Well, why don't you need the actual words? Bereshis Bar Lekim, how to write it, how to spell it. No, I don't need that. Why I don't need that? So here are a few possibilities. Possibility number one is he knew it by heart. He felt that he knew it by heart. I don't know how much I accept that possibility, but but that's one possibility, I'm just putting it out there. But number 2, this is a more reasonable possibility. He's like, what do you mean? In Shul there's a Sefer Torah. In Shul there's a Sefer Torah. When I need to know what the words are, I go and take the Sefer Torah. What do I need a Chumash for? I need a Chumash because I need to know I'm a copyist, I'm a sofer. I produce Chumashim, that's my job. So I need to know what the Sefer Torah doesn't present. What does the Sefer Torah not present? It doesn't give me the trop, it doesn't tell me where to put the trop, and it doesn't give me the Mesorah words. So that's what I need to do. Or another way of saying it is there was one sofer whose expertise was in writing the letters in your Chumash. If you wanted a Chumash written, he would write you the letters. There was another person who was a professional in giving you nikud. But then there was a guy whose expertise was in giving you the trop. That was his expertise. And so, because that's his expertise, this is all he needs. So what? So now like this. If he's going to go and commission someone to write for him the full Tanakh, that's going to be very, very expensive. It's much more parchment, much more animal hides, much more ink, much more time. But if he only needs to hire the scribe to write 1 letter from each word, so you're saving, it's less than a quarter of the job. You're saving a lot of money and you're saving a lot of time. So he feels like it's very expensive, so why should I do it? Number 1. And number 2, I don't need this because of the 3 possibilities that I gave to you before, why he feels that it's enough for him just to have the placement of where the trop needs to be, and so he gets this, and it's not one person. This was a societal phenomenon, it seems like. How extensive, we don't know. But it seems like there were a number of people, because there's not one manuscript like this. There's a nice number of manuscripts. Nice, I don't want to exaggerate, but there's a nice handful of manuscripts that are like this. Okay, this, I want to think about the following Gemara. The Gemara in Gittin, Daf Samach Hamad Aleph, and as you're going to see, it connects a little to what we are having over here. The Gemara here deals with the fact that you're not allowed to write portions of the Torah separately. When you produce the Torah, it has to be the whole thing. You're not allowed to just take a random parsha here and there and produce it on a piece of parchment. She'ein koisvin. You're not allowed to write Torah in separate, distinct Megilahs. So the Gemara asks, Gittin Daf Samach Aleph, Eisvei, we're going to ask a question. We're talking about Hilani Hamalka, a queen who lived during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, where she wanted to make a donation to the Beis HaMikdash, and Asasa Tavla Shalzav, she made a golden plate, Shaparsha Saita Ksuva Aleh, where she had written out Parsha Saita. Why? Because the Kohen, when a Saita ceremony is taking place, needs to write the Parsha Saita on parchment. Where is he copying it from? The Kohen doesn't know it Baal Peh, so the Kohen needs to copy it off something. So they used to copy it off scrolls. So she said, no, Bakavadik, let's have them copy it off gold. What do you see from here? You see that you could have a parsha of Torah written out separately. It was written out on gold separately. So the Gemara answers, no, it's not a shaila. Why is it not a shaila? Because she didn't write the whole thing. Her golden tablet didn't have the whole thing. It was written out by Aleph Beis. Zak Rashi. Only the initial letter was written out for each one. Now the Gemara has a continuous shakla tarya and then adjusts the conclusion by saying, in fact, the model was seirugin. Rashi explains, what does that mean? Tchilas hamikra hayukasav teva shleima. The first word of each, this presumably means pasuk, was written out in full, and then the rest of the pasuk was written out as a Rasha Tevis. So there's something similar to what we're talking about, and also something very different. First, let's talk about what's similar. What's similar here is that someone needs to copy a text. That's similar. And the model that they're using, the base that they're using, the master copy that they're using, doesn't have the whole text b'shleimus. It has the first word of each pasuk. That's similar to what we saw. But after that, it doesn't have the first word of each pasuk anymore. After that, it's in an abbreviated form. That's similar to what we saw. What's the difference? The difference is that by here Rasha Tevis means Rasha Tevis. So it means the first word. Because the Kohen just needed the first letter to then know how to write the rest. We saw not Rasha Tevis. It wasn't the first letter because, as we explained, it's the letter of the trop, and we tried to explain why that would be so. Okay, so that's a difference between them, but there's a lot of similarity here, and let me exploit this similarity a little more, because I want you, in a certain way, to think about the fact that we're dealing here with gold. And you could ask the question, why would she not have just written out the entire Parsha Soita on gold? So I think we all know the answer to that. That would have been awfully expensive to write out. It's a very long parsha of many, many psukim. I didn't count. It's a lot of psukim. To write that all out on gold, I don't know if even Eleni Amalka thought that this is advisable or affordable for her. And so she sufficed with doing a little on gold. And in a certain sense, we have to remember, we live in a very spoiled age. In a certain sense, having parchment, ink, writing out, it was a very, very expensive process. In a certain sense, it's like gold. Obviously, it wasn't expensive like gold, not even close. But relative to the way we think about paper, and relative to the way we think about how you don't have to write things by hand, you can type them out quickly, or you can go to the store and buy things that were printed and mass-produced. In a certain sense, just like it's so obvious that she wouldn't have written out the whole thing on gold, because that would be ridiculous, so too, it was obvious for certain Jews that it makes no sense to write out the whole thing on a piece of parchment, because it's very expensive, takes a very long time. Why do it? And by the way, it's also bulky and makes it a harder thing to carry around. So you can throw that into the thing. So if it's not necessary, why do it? And this would explain the phenomenon of those chomashim that we just saw. Now, all of that is fascinating, very interesting. At least I find it fascinating and interesting. However, it doesn't help us at all when it comes to the Megilahs. Because the Megilahs that we saw, we didn't get one letter for each word. And we didn't get where the trop is for each word. We didn't get any of that. What we got was 2-3 words from the beginning of each pasuk. And so therefore, that's a different story. And while on the surface there is some similarities between them, that they're both incomplete passages of Tanakh, but what we just saw and we just learned over here isn't really going to help us to understand why we have these incomplete Megillah Esters. And so we need to continue to the next part of the story, and now we need to look at the Tehilim manuscripts. We're looking now at what we call Kapitel Tzadik in Tehilim. Tefillah l'Moshe Isho Elokim. Now on the top left you'll see it actually designates this kapitel as Peiches. Throughout this manuscript it is a few kapitel achof. Don't be surprised by that. The Gemara has a different count for the kapitel Tehilim. If I recall correctly, it says it's Kuf Mem Zayin. So there are different ways of counting the kapitel Tehilim, which need not concern us here right now. Here it says Megilah, which means we finished book 3 and we're about to begin book 4 of Tehilim. Tefillah l'Moshe Isho Elokim. Baruch Hashem, I could read this. Hashem, Moiz, Ata Yisalanu, Ma'oin, Ata Yisalanu, B'doir V'doir. That was good. The first pasuk worked out all right. Then I continue. B'terem Harim, and then things start getting very interesting. I have a Yud and a Lamed. That's obviously Yuladu. B'terem Harim, Yuladu. U'techoylel Eretz. I have over here 2 letters for each word. Let me show it on a Chumash so it's clear what we're looking at. Yuladu, the Yud and the Lamed, are presented. Vatechoylel, just the Vav and the Taf. Eretz, just the Aleph and the Reish. Visevel, just the Vav and the Saf. Umei Oilam, just the Vav and the Mem. Ad, just the Ayin. Oilam, just the Ayin and the Vav. You get the point. Here, this is different. This is not like our Megillah Esters, because those gave you 2-3 words from each pasuk. This is different. This is not like what we're going to call the Sofer Tikkun, because the Sofer Tikkun gave you, yes, something for each word, but it gave you the place where you stress the word, where you put the trup. This is not what's happening here. Here there's a different pattern. The pattern here is each word is represented, but not in full, just with the first 2 letters pretty much. And that's how the entirety of the kapitel works. Each pasuk, first word given in full. The rest of the pasuk were just given 2, usually about 2, sometimes 1 letter. Let me show you this in another one. Now this one, the first one that I'm showing you here, looks nice. When we look at it, you can tell the calligraphy. This is a professional scribe who wrote this. And now we're going to show you something that does not look at all even half as decent. This is much more amateurish. But when we read this and when we see what this is, we're able to tell that this is Perek Tes of Tehilim doing the same thing. Okay? So, Doiresh, Damim, what it is, I'm looking at this manuscript right now and I see the first 2 letters of each word. I'm going to try to read it off this manuscript and see if you can do it with me as well. Doiresh, Damim, Oisam, Zachar, Loi, Shachach, Sakas, Anovim. Chaneneni, Hashem, Re'eh. Okay, there I got stuck because I don't know the next word. Oh, it's missing a word. Oh, there's a circle here. The circle is the guy realized he missed the word Onyi. He jumped to the next word, which is Misoinoi. All right. The same pattern. You have the same pattern over here. Kapitel Tes is presented. We are getting, for every word, we are getting 2 or 3 letters, not the entire word being presented. And there's some, these circles tell you he missed a word. And so he comes back to fill it in, or it's just a sign that, by the way, you should know I missed a word. He doesn't fill it in later. When you're reading this, then you know that a word was missing. Okay, you continue reading and you go down and you're making your way through Kapitel Tes and you come to this pasuk over here, pasuk Yud Ches. So let's read the end of pasuk Yud Zayin, So the end of pasuk Yud Zayin is Kapov, Noikesh, Rasha, Higoyin, Sela. That's great. And then the next word is supposed to be Yoshuvu Rishoyim Lishoyla, and we get none of that here. This line, we get none of that. Yoshuvu Rishoyim Lishoyla Kol Goyim Shcheche Elokim. The next line, we get none of that. Instead, we get foreign letters. In fact, you go to the next line is where you get Pasuk Yud Ches. Yoshuvu Rishoyim Lishoyla is missing, but there's a circle over there telling you that he knows he missed the word. Yoshuvu Rishoyim Lishoyla Kol Goyim. Okay, so this is Pasuk Yud Ches. Here is pasuk Yud Zayin. Sandwiched in between Yud Zayin and Yud, we have a line of gibberish that does not belong here. Now what's unique about this is that each letter has a dot over it. Which, now let's think about it. Remember in the Torah, sometimes there are dots. What do the dots mean in the Torah? It means to minimize the word. The word said he kissed him. Well, he didn't really kiss him, right? So it's usually minimizing the impact of the word. So that's probably what's happening over here is that instead of crossing these words out, not sure why the scribe didn't do that, he's saying this is a mistake. This doesn't belong here. I made a mistake. I caught my mistake. So he puts dots on top of it to tell you that it's don't pay this line any attention. Well, what is the mistake? It matters to know what is this mistake. So I didn't figure this out, but there's a scholar who studied this whole topic closely. His name is Kim Phillips, and he's over at the Cambridge University Library, and he focuses on the Geniza. And he figured out what this is. What is it? You have a line here from, remember, we're in capital Tes. This errand line is from capital Nun Tes. Yashuvu, La'erev, Yehemu, Chakolev, V'soivavu, Ir. That is capital Nun Tes, pasuk Zayin. Now here the question is, why in the world would a scribe who's writing Tes, throw in a line from Nun Tes by mistake? How does that even happen? We know how mistakes, when you're copying off a page, you may mistake which line you're on. And then you think you're on line 2, and really you're on line 4, and so you copy line 2 and you made a mistake. But this is 50 capital away. So how did he start copying from capital Nun Tes over here? So what's the answer? The answer is, let's notice where he made the mistake. He made the mistake where Selo Yoshuvu. Okay? Selo Yoshuvu. That's Perek Tes, pasuk Yud Zayin, ends with the word Sela. Perek Tes, pasuk Yud Ches begins with the word Yeshuvu. There's one other place in Tehilim where a pasuk ends with Sela and the next pasuk begins with Yeshuvu. That's Perek Nun Tes. Pasuk Vav ends with Sela and Zayin begins with the word Yeshuvu. So what happened is the guy who's writing this says Sela Yeshuvu. He's in Tes, but in his mind Nun Tes comes to the fore and he writes out the rest of the pasuk from Perek Nun Tes. Now, that makes a lot of sense to see what happened here. Then he corrected his mistake, put the dots on it, and moved on. Now, what does that tell you? When he was copying this, how was he copying it? He's copying it by heart. Now, what does that tell you? When he's copying it by heart, what does that mean? That means this guy really knows his Tehilim. But on the other hand, does he really know his Tehilim? He does and he doesn't. It's actually amazing. He wrote this entire page, presumably by heart, and even his mistake allowed him to write a different capital pasuk by heart. Clearly, he's not copying off the text, he's writing by heart, but at the same time, he made a mistake. Now, why is this mistake so important to know? Because this tells you why this document is needed. Now you know why this document is needed. There's a Yid who knows Tehilim, and he pretty much knows it by heart. He actually doesn't really think he needs a Tehilim. And he's kind of right, except for he makes these types of mistakes. Because there's so many parallels, it's easy to get lost. What do you need? So you're going to go to a scribe, and you commission the scribe to write out for you what the whole Tehilim is going to cost you thousands of dollars. You don't need to do that. You rather pay a quarter of the price to get what you need. And getting what you need is only triggers. These particular triggers is enough for you to be able to read your Tehilim by heart. Jews read Tehilim all the time. And it has very important skulas involved. It's a centerpiece of davening, and so it would make sense that someone will want to do this. Today, it makes no sense to us. You go to the store and buy the full Tehilim, right? But that's looking at it from our lens today. It's rather easy and cheap to produce a Tehilim and to buy a Tehilim, whereas then the labor involved, the parchment involved, the writing involved, the time involved, all of that. I don't need it. I pretty much know my Tehilim. I say it every day. I just need some. And by the way, this is a kapitel. If you came closer to the screen, you would actually be able to read the entire kapitel because you all know Tefillah L'Moshe pretty well. You would be able to read it just off these triggers. Tashev, Enosh, Ad, Daka, Vatoimer, Shuvu, B'nai, Adam. You would have an easy time. And in order for this to work, you can't do what the Soifrim did. What you do what the Soifrim did, that's great if you want to write out Trap. If you want to know how to write out Trop and a new Chumash, the Sefer's model works. But for reading, it's a nightmare. Try it. It's actually very, very difficult. If you want it to help you with reading, what you need is the initial letter of each word, the initial 2 letters of each word. That kind of gets you going and gives you what you need. And so now we're seeing that there's 2 separate institutions here. One institution over here is for a scribe who's writing a Chumash, who needs only Trop and the placement of the Trop and Mesoira. That's all he needs. There's another institution. Another institution is someone who wants to be a Tehilim Zagar. He wants to say Tehilim. He doesn't want, either he can't afford it or he doesn't want to wait for the whole thing. He's happy to have an abbreviated Tehilim to get him through. Now these abbreviations in Tehilim that I showed you till now give you every single word with the initial letter. However, now let me show you the following Tehilim. Here is also an abbreviated Tehilim, and it's Perek Mem Beis. Lanatseach maskil livneit koirach ka'ayol taroig sama nafshi hoisoli eila eskra matish toichachi elekai olai. This is a different model. This is the first 2 words of every pasuk. This is not the first letter of each word. It's the first 2-3 words of every pasuk. As you can see highlighted here on the left, where I give you the words that are presented. Presumably, it's for the same purpose, it's just a different method. What's the function? For the Tehilim Sayer. What's the method? The method is, instead of giving you, you don't need to give me 1 letter for each word, just start me off on each pasuk. Start me off each pasuk, I'm going to be alright. Except for, there are some times that even starting off a pasuk, you're not going to be alright. Look over here, Perek Mem Beis Pasuk Yud, all of a sudden we have an aberration. We have almost the whole pasuk written out. Oimra lekel sali lama shchachtani lama koider elech. Over here. Oimra lekel sali lama shchachtani lama koider elech. Why all of a sudden did the scribe do that? Why did he give us so many words from Perek Mem Beis Pasuk Yud? And if you go to Perek Mem Gimel, Pasuk Beis, we see Ki ata lekei ma'uzi lamas nachtani, and the word eshalech later on in the Pasuk also highlighted. Why did he break from his pattern, giving 1, 2, 3 words? Never 1, 2, 3 words. Why now is he suddenly giving us more? Well, once we understand what the function is to get you to say your Tehilim Baal Peh without a full Tehilim. But I need to save you from getting mixed up. Once you understand that, then it becomes immediately apparent why you had to do extra wording here in Mem Beis and Mem Gimel. Because Perek Mem Beis Pasuk Yud, Oimra lekel sali lama shchachtani. Perek Mem Gimel Pasuk Beis has the same word lama, but it's followed by znachtani. Do you think you'd be able to know if it's lama shchachtani or lama znachtani? I would get confused by that. And in fact, this one has lama koider elech. This has lama koider es halech. So the scribe, knowing the purpose and function of this, to keep people on track that they don't get mixed up, knows that in this particular case, it is not sufficient for him to give you 1 letter of each word. He needs to give you, he's not doing that here. If he were doing that, that wouldn't be a problem. But because he chose the method of giving just the first 2-3 words of each pasuk, here where pasukim are similar, he has no choice but to add extra words to keep us on track. Okay, so now we understand these 2 parshas. We understand the parsha of the written Sefer manual. We understand the parsha of the Tehilims. Now, before we circle back to talk about the Megilahs Esther, let's now talk about a passage from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the Kuzri. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi wrote the Kuzri sometime in the 12th century in Spain, and this is presented as a dialogue between a king, the king of the Khazars, and a rabbi who's presenting and explaining all of Judaism. And in Maimer Sheni, there is a very interesting passage where this non-Jewish king asks the rabbi to please explain why Jews shackle when they're doing kriyas ha'ivris, when they're reading. So if that means learning, if that means davening, maybe it means both. But he's asking over here the very common question, why do Jews shackle? What's the answer that that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi presents over here? The answer that he presents raises a lot of eyebrows. The answer is, sometimes there could be 10 or so Jews around one book, which is why we make our books very large. And so then what happens is that once in a while, one guy needs to lean in to read the book to see the word, and then he goes back to his default position. And then another guy also needs to lean in to see the word, and he reverts back to his default position. And that is the original reason why Jews shuckle when they're learning and they're davening, and then just people thought it's a thing, and they started emulating each other, which is normal for humans to do. Others, presumably he means Christians, perhaps Muslims, don't share books. They all read from their own book, and that's why it never turned out with this type of reality where they need to shuckle. Okay, this is what he writes over there. He's basically the Kuzri finds deeper meaning in everything, and throughout his sefer he's always explaining how things are very, very significant. And here, the way I think we're supposed to read this is he's saying, let's not make a big deal out of this. There's more important things that we need to talk about rather than finding a meaning and significance in shuckling. But anyway, our topic isn't so much the shuckling per se, but the Yavitz, by the way, did not like this at all. In his Hakdama to the Siddur, he writes, so he says he doesn't buy this. He thinks this doesn't really add up, that to say that the shuckling began by this type of thing. But okay, the Yavitz's objection is noted, but let's think for a second, what is the Kuzri writing? The Kuzri is writing about the dearth of Jewish books, the fact that it isn't so easy to always have a sefer. So, and that's very much relates to what we're seeing right now. But I want to say another point about this, and maybe we should modify the Kuzri's theory. How do you modify the Kuzri's theory? So especially in the last Tehilim that we saw, what did we see? You have the first two words of each pasuk, and then the rest of the pasuk you don't have. And that you're supposed to remember by heart. So let me ask you a question. When you want to memorize something by heart, your eyes are open or closed? Yeah, I think you close your eyes. Most people, they close their eyes when they remember. In fact, do you have a tendency sometimes when you want to remember something to lean your head back? I think so. A lot of people have that tendency. When they want to remember something, they lean their head back. On the other hand, when you want to read the initial words of each pasuk, you need to look down. So could we imagine a scene where Jews are looking down at the first two words and then looking up to memory? Down to read the first two words and then back up for memory. And maybe that's how shuckling began. Once you're going with the Kuzri's model, then you could present this. I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek. Okay. Now all of this does not help us at all for Esther. Let me explain why. Megilah Tehilim. We read Tehilim. It's a need. We have it. Why? So although the last Tehilim that I showed you is very similar to the Esther scrolls, the Esther scrolls gave us first pasuk and then the initial words, and the last Tehilim that I showed you did that, and the function of the Tehilim was for you to be able to read it Baal Peh. I get that. But what does it do with a Megillah? It's not kosher to read in shul, we established. You're going to bring it along with you in shul to follow along? What function, what benefit do you have to having a few words there? It's not going to help you. You don't need, just sit in shul and listen to the Megillah. In what way are you going to help? So you say, but to read it at home. When do you read? You read the Megillah at home? Who reads the Megillah at home? It's not, there is no ritual. But at the same time, when we actually look at the Megillah, at the following Megillah, it's going to become clear that it does seem that the point here was to enable someone to read it. It does seem like the point is very similar to the Tehilim. I'm going to establish that point in a minute. Before I make that point, I want to show you something really interesting here. This is an abbreviated Megillah. If we look over here, you'll see. Vayashav Mordechai al Shar HaMelech. End of the pasuk. Vayisaper Haman lezeresh ishtoy l'chol oyava. Oidam medabrim imoy. Clearly is giving you, this is an abbreviated Megillah in the same style of having only the first few words of each pasuk. But you'll notice over here that actually it reads pretty full. Very kavul arsus berchay ve'ir v'karol lefanav kachi yasa leisha shar hamelech hafetz bikarei v'yamar Haman hamelech lahaman kachas halavusha asus kasher debarta v'asichin lemordechai Yehudi yeshiv b'shar hamelech al tap. You have a lot of text here that's flowing in the middle. So why is that? I'm going to answer that question in a second. Before I answer that question, I want you to notice this. Asher hamelech chafetz. The word is bikaroi. Chafetz bikaroi. His honor, right? What does it say here? It doesn't say bikaroi as one word. It says pi karoiv. Pi karoiv. Chafetz pi karoiv. And then here, the second time, it says chafetz pi kagu. Kagu. Kagoi. Kuf gimel vav. How do you make this mistake? It's impossible to make this mistake by looking, and we understand a vav. I thought it was a vav, and I wrote a yud. I thought it's a yud, I made a vav. I thought it's a dalet, I made a resh. How do you get from bi karoi to pi karoiv, two separate words. Or pi kagoi, two separate words. It's very hard to understand how this mistake could happen unless you think about it in a way of audio. Which means, and now let's go into a medieval workshop. You're running a business. Your job is to write Megilahs. That's your job, not for the shul to be read, but for people. People want it for their libraries. Your job's to write a Chumash. Your job's to write a Siddur. So how you do it? So if you're a small guy, you just write your own little thing. You write one. No, but you're an entrepreneur. If you're an entrepreneur, how are you going to do it? You're going to hire 10 people who need parnasa. You're going to bring them into the room. You're going to give each one a quill and a piece of parchment. And you're going to say, we're starting. 3, 2, 1, go. Vayehi. Be may. And you're gonna do this. You're gonna call it out. And you're gonna have the guy write it. So you come chafetz, and you're already well into the Megillah. The guy is tired. His ears aren't working anymore. Instead of bi kara, he hears pi karov. And then the second time he heard pi kagoi. So this error is a fascinating error because all of a sudden I feel like I'm walking into this medieval scribal workshop, seeing how the work is getting done. Okay, but let me answer the question. Why is it have all of a sudden so much text between Kapitlach Tes and Yud? We already know what the answer is going to be. It's going to be similarities. In Pasuk Tes, you have Birchoi Va'ir. In Pasuk Yud Aleph, you also have Birchoi Va'ir. One is Birchoi Va'ir V'karu Lefanav. This is Birchoi Va'ir V'yikra Lefanav. There's another similarity between this psukim. In Pasuk Yud, it says Kaches Halavusha Es Asus. In Pasuk Yud Aleph, it says Es Halavusha Es Asus V'yalbesh Es Mordechai. So the first one says, Es halavusha es asus kasher dibarta. The second one says, Es halavusha es asus vayilbash. Easy to get mixed up. Easy to get mixed up. If the whole purpose is for memory, here it's not enough that I give you the first few words. I need to give you the whole thing. This is at least my interpretation of what's happening over here. But still, we didn't answer the fundamental question. The fundamental question is, why do we need to have Megillas Esther? Who is reading Megillas Esther? Don't worry, we're going to give you an answer. The answer goes as follows. The answer is going to come from a passage of Maseches Soifrim. What is Maseches Soifrim? Maseches Soifrim, if you open up your Shas, usually at the end of Seder and Ezekin, there's these Masechtas that are written in the Sprach of Mishnah on a whole bunch of topics. One of those topics is Maseches Soifrim. This is not part of the Mishnayos. In fact, there's a discussion about when these were even written. The Chidah has a passage in Shem HaGdolim where he writes, he quotes from the Rosh, he quotes from the Taz, that the Taz says it comes from the era of the Tanoim. In other words, the Taz is arguing that it's Brisa, essentially. Just like we have passages of Brisa that didn't make it into the Mishnah, so all of these Maseches Soifrim and other similar tractates are Brisa. They're from the era of Tanoim. Chidah says this doesn't work out. He says, how could you say that? When you read Maseches Soifrim, you see names of Amoraim, and you see even names of very, very late Amoraim in it. So it can't be that it's from the Tanoim. Then he goes further and says there's a Rosh, and he quotes the Rosh that says that Maseches Soifrim was neschaber b'doiros achroinim, which that means after the Gemara, during the era of the Go'onim, presumably. 8th century, 9th century, something like that is when it was written. And the Rosh writes that it's not cited in the Talmud. Now he goes on to qualify this. There are passages of Maseches Soifrim that are in the Gemara. But you have to think about what's the chicken and what's the egg. It's not pshat that the Gemara was taking from Maseches Soifrim. The Chidah says it's the other way around. Maseches Soifrim, which was a late work, took passages from Gemara, so it could mislead you to think that it comes from the era of the Amoraim. It really is just quoting things from the Amoraim. Okay, and this is the shita of the Chidah about Maseches Soifrim. What does it say in Maseches Soifrim? It says as follows: Amar Reb Levi, Megillas Esther, the Megillah tzarich lekroisa balayla. This means on Purim, you need to read it at night. Uleshanoisa beyoim. Then you need to read it a second time by day. Then it goes on. That's the chiyuv. Then it goes on to say v'nohag wa'am, and there's a custom of the people la'oimra to read it, to say it b'moitzoi shabbosos shal Adar, on Moitzah Shabbos of the month of Adar. B'Shabbos Rishona Shal Adar, the first Shabbos of Adar, Koidin Ha'am B'Yachad Ad Balaylahu. The first Shabbos of Adar, which would be this coming up Shabbos, we read from Vayhi B'Meach HaShveirosh until Balaylahu. Uvemoitzoi Shabbos Shniya, and the second Moitzoi Shabbos, Koidin Mibalaylahu Ad V'Doiver Shalom L'Chol Zareh. Then we read from Balaylahu till the end of the Megillah. It's interesting. It's what does this remind me of? It reminds me of the minig of reading the Haggadah on the Shabbos before Pesach. You read the Haggadah. So here, the Shabbos, by the way, Moitzoi Shabbos, Yesh La'ayin, if the kavan is mamish, like after Ma'ariv, or Moitzoi maybe doesn't mean as Shabbos is going out, meaning after Mincha. Chveisnish. But the bottom line is, it was a custom of reading the Megilah, Meseches Sofrim. This is a minig that the Meseches Sofrim talks about as happening during the Tkufa, I don't know, the 9th century, the 10th century, the 8th century, I don't know exactly when. Generally speaking, the things that it says here reflect things that were going on in Eretz Yisrael. Mitzrayim is right next to Eretz Yisrael. And this may be the answer to our story. The answer to our story is, yes, there was a need for shorthand Megillas Esther's for those people who wanted it, because there was this minig to read it during those 2 Shabbos before Adar in order to get into the spirit of the Yom Tov. This minig, however, was forgotten. And in recent generations, there was an attempt to revive this particular minig. In the Sefer Mishmeret Shalom from Reb Shalom of Koidenov, this is a Sefer of Chassidus, Dinim and Menhagim from the Koidenov dynasty of Chassidus. This was printed in the early 1900s. The author's name was Reb Shalom. He was the son of one of the Rebbes of Koidenov. Anyway, he brings it. Look what he writes over here. He writes, B'Mesechet Sofrim it says that there used to be a minig to read the Megillah on Motzei Shabbos, and he says a minig over here, and on the side he writes, I wrote this minig because those who want should do it because it probably has very important remazim, and I heard that Rabbi Yitzchak of Skver has this minig. So it's interesting that minhagim get lost sometimes. It's not often they get revived. And here you have a Chassidic community, and there's a few Chassidic communities today that took on this minig to actually bring this back. And so this coming Shabbos and the next Shabbos, they're going to be reading from the Megillah, following this old custom from Meseches Sofrim. Let's conclude with a few thoughts. Number 1, the Gemara in Meseches Gittin Daf Samach Amud Beis says that Dvarim Shebeksav, you're not allowed to say Baal Peh. This is a din. Things that are written in Torah Shebeksav are not allowed to say Baal Peh. Now we all know that we find ourselves here and there saying Dvarim Shebeksav Baal Peh. There's a long discussion in Halacha about why it's permitted at times to say certain things that are Beksav, to read it Baal Peh. The Alter Rebbe addresses this in Shulchan Aruch, and he gives 2 heterim. The 2 heterim the Alter Rebbe gives is Kol Davar Shu Shagur V'Ragol B'Fi HaKoil. This is in Siman Mem Tes. Anything that everyone knows, that is mutter. Okay, heter number 1. Then he says another heter which is broader. It's only aser if it's oimer kedei lahoitzi acherim yedei chavasei. Only if you're doing it to be mitzi, Kriyas HaTorah, Megillah, something like that. But if Yestamazoi reading Kol Echad La'atzmai is going to be mutter. Then he says there's a machlokes about whether this second heter is accurate or inaccurate, and obviously this second heter would apply to the issue that we're dealing with here, that it's being read, chunks of the Megillah and chunks of Tehilim would be read Baal Peh. I don't think it would be fair to say that it was Shagur V'Ragil B'Fi HaKoil, but it was not being done in a sense of being mitzi other people their chayt. However, I looked at the different svarim that discussed the different heterim, and I wondered, can you say that if you're doing it in this way, then b'chlal there's no isser? Because for each pasuk, there's at least one word that you're doing metoich haksav. So if that's the case, if you're doing one word, so maybe you say that's already considered enough. Or no, maybe you would say that that's not enough. It's an interesting thought that requires further consideration. That's number 1. Number 2, this is the Sefer Yereim. The Sefer Yereim was authored by Rabbi Lazar of Metz. He lived in the 13th century. It's a halacha sefer from Ashkenaz, and he addresses this isser to say Baal Peh Dvarim Shebechsav. And he gives a reason. What's the problem? Why does it have to be that Dvarim Shebechsav you read Metoich HaKsav? Zakter she'im hayinu oinrim Dvarim Shebechsav Baal Peh hayu misyashin lekoisom. If it would be okay to write it Baal Peh, then we're just going to go with, if it's going to be okay to recite it Baal Peh, then we're just going to get comfortable reciting it Baal Peh, and we're actually never going to write it, and we're going to lose the literary tradition. This is what Sefer Yereim was writing. And now when I looked at this for the first time, I said, really? That's really going to happen? If we're starting to do it Baal Peh, we're really going to stop writing the text? Well, you actually now through this shir, I hope you actually see that it's actually not such a crazy thing to say. Yeah, we actually saw an attempt not to move away completely from the written text, but within Torah Shebeksav to kind of minimize the Ksav with the Torah Shebeksav because of the expense, because of the difficulty. And so therefore, this law is kind of forcing us to say, as much as there's a temptation to move to Baal Peh because it's so difficult to write things down, no, you're not allowed to do that. Suddenly, after studying all of this Sefer Yereim has much more force for me. And finally, the last thing I want to say is the following. You're looking here at the editor's note to the Gemara Brachas that was printed by the Sansinos in 1484. And this is obviously in the incunabular stage of printing. This is mamish the first few decades. Very few books were printed by this time. It's of, not the, but of the first batch of Svarim that were printed in the 1470s and 1480s. This is Brachas 1484. And the editor's name is Gavriel ben Aaron, and he signs his name at the bottom of the note. And I want to read what he writes over here. Many seek the word of Hashem, but cannot find it, for they cannot afford to buy books that they are missing. Printing has two benefits. It enables the quick production of many copies so that the entire world can be filled with knowledge. B, the price of each volume is considerably less compared to the price of those written by hand. It's something we take for granted today, printing, and alachas kam v'kama, the electronic resources where texts are just available so easy. There was once a time it was so difficult. And what we saw today, there was one story of the tikkun for the Sofrim. There was another story for Tehilim where it's about reciting it. And I showed you that Megilah also seems to be about this special custom to recite it. And by looking at this, what we saw was that it's not so easy to write these things down. And people were looking for ways to cut corners, to make it easier. It was very, very difficult. Printing introduced a revolution. The electronic age and the internet age introduced its own revolution. And so, guided by the spirit of today's shir, the idea is that in the days prior to Purim, let us use those resources that we have to look up, learn something, a shtickle on the Megillah, varm sich on a little, find something inspiring, because the resources are there, and there's no need anymore for any shortcuts.